Gideon Rourke didn't expect anything unusual on that Tuesday night. The rain outside Portland's east side had just started to taper into drizzle, and his tiny craftsman home smelled like rosemary and garlic from the skillet of chicken he'd cooked. Work had been ordinary. Numbers, clients, spreadsheets, and dinner with Cambria had been his small relief. They ate in the living room instead of at the table, legs stretched out, plates balanced on the coffee table. Gideon had refinished himself. The Netflix menu hummed in the background. It was domestic, quiet, predictable. Exactly how Gideon liked it. That's when Cambria put her fork down. She didn't fidget much, never had, but that night her eyes skittered toward the wall instead of his face. "I think we need a break," she said. At first, Gideon thought she was talking about the show they'd half-watched. His brain filled the silence with nonsense. A break from what? Streaming, cooking, work. Then the words settled. A break. He leaned back against the couch cushion, watching her. "A break," he repeated. His voice was flat, steady. Her fingers traced the rim of her water glass. "Yeah, I don't know. I've been feeling restless. Like I need to figure myself out." That phrase, "figure myself out," landed like a cinder block in Gideon's stomach. He'd heard friends use it before, all of them warning signs for what came next. People didn't pause a relationship to figure themselves out. They paused to keep the door open for someone else. "Restless," he said slowly, as if testing the word on his tongue. Cambria nodded. "I love you, Gideon. You know that, but I feel like I don't know who I am outside of this. I need some space to think." There it was, the script. Space, break, self-discovery. Gideon set his plate down carefully, wiped his mouth with a napkin, and faced her fully. "If you need a break, Cambria, you can have one. But let's be clear about something. This is my house. If you want space, you'll need to pack your things tonight." Her mouth fell open. "Wait, what, tonight?" "Yes," he said simply. "You can't be serious." "I am." For a long beat, the only sound was the rain ticking against the window panes. Cambria's chest rose and fell quickly, her composure breaking. "Gideon, I'm not saying I want to leave. I just need time. Don't you think we could, I don't know, stay together but give each other some breathing room?" Gideon shook his head. "That's not a break, Cambria. That's you having me as a backup while you test the waters elsewhere. I'm not doing that." He exhaled through his nose, rubbed his temples, and went about his routine. Gym bag over his shoulder, black coffee in hand, he walked out the door like he had every weekday for years. The difference was coming back to silence, to no one at the stove, no Cambria humming while she scrolled through her phone. That evening, after work, Gideon stood in the living room staring at the remnants. Her sweater draped over the couch. The throw pillows she'd insisted on buying, they'll brighten the place up, trust me, still arranged the way she liked. The bookshelf, half hers, half his, carried an odd imbalance now. Her copy of The Alchemist leaned sideways like a crooked tooth. Gideon wasn't angry, at least not yet. Anger required energy, and right then he felt only a dull weight in his chest. Not grief, not devastation, more like irritation, like finding out you've been waiting in the wrong line for hours. Around 9, he pulled out cardboard boxes from the closet. One by one, he collected her things. The hair straightener left in the bathroom drawer. The oversized hoodies she'd borrowed permanently. The little ceramic trinkets she bought from flea markets, cluttering shelves Gideon had preferred bare. Into the box they went. Not with rage, not with ceremony, just methodical sorting. When he reached for her books, he paused. She had scrawled her name inside many covers, tiny loops of cursive in the top right corner. He flipped open The Alchemist, her most treasured one, and found underlined sentences. "When you want something, all the universe conspires in helping you to achieve it." Gideon snorted softly. "Except when you walk away from it," he muttered. He dropped it in the box. By midnight, everything Cambria had left behind was sealed in 2 neat containers. Gideon labeled them with her name in thick black marker and slid them into the hall closet. Out of sight, out of mind. The next morning, his sister called. Rhiannon Rourke, always blunt, always the first to react. "She really just left, like that," Gideon confirmed. He stood at the window, watching Portland's traffic crawl by. "God, Gideon, I'm sorry. But, good for you. Don't let her make you her doormat. You're better than that." Her words were intended to comfort, but Gideon found himself oddly detached. "I know," he said simply. That night, his best friend Callum dropped by with a 6-pack. Callum had been with Gideon through college debauchery, job changes, and heartbreaks, though nothing quite like this. He plopped onto the couch, popped a can, and said, "Man, imagine if she'd done this after you two were married." Bullet dodged. Gideon took a long sip of beer and let the idea settle. Callum was right. If Cambria could walk out so easily now, What would stop her 5 years down the line, with kids, a mortgage, and lives entangled? The thought wasn't bitter, it was clarifying. Still, the nights felt strange. Gideon found himself staring at the ceiling longer than usual, noticing the empty space beside him in bed. He realized how much of his routine had been shaped around Cambria's presence, the way he'd made extra coffee without thinking, the way he'd reached for her hand while crossing the street, the way he'd expected her texts throughout the day. Habits carved into muscle memory now left hanging. On the third day, Mrs. Aldridge, his neighbor from across the street, waved him down as he left for work. She was in her 60s, always alert to the neighborhood gossip. "Everything okay, Gideon? Haven't seen Cambria around." He gave her a polite smile. "She's staying with family for a while." Mrs. Aldridge tilted her head knowingly, as if she already suspected more. "Well, if you ever need company, I bake on Sundays." "Thank you," Gideon said. He walked away with the distinct feeling that his private life was about to become public chatter. By the end of the week, he'd settled into a rhythm. Work, gym, quiet dinners alone. The house felt calmer, though the absence remained like a shadow at the edge of vision. He wasn't mourning Cambria as much as recalibrating himself, adjusting the weight of life without her. On Friday night, Gideon found himself sitting at the dining table, something he hadn't done often when she was around. A single plate, a single glass of wine. He stared at the chair across from him, empty and unremarkable, and realized he didn't miss Cambria. Not really. What he missed was the idea of partnership, the shared future he thought they were building. The woman who had walked out was not the woman he thought he knew. That realization was both sobering and liberating. He cleaned his plate, washed his glass, and looked around his quiet house. For the first time, he thought, maybe this isn't emptiness. Maybe it's freedom. By the following weekend, Gideon realized something important. People notice absence faster than presence. Cambria's absence became a subject long before he ever brought it up. At work, his colleague Shay asked, "Didn't Cambria usually bring you lunch on Fridays?" "Haven't seen her around." At the gym, one of the trainers mentioned, "Hey, where's your girl? She used to wait for you after your sets." Even the barista at the coffee shop raised an eyebrow when Gideon came alone for the third morning in a row. The silence in his home had multiplied into a chorus outside of it. Everyone seemed to be poking at the missing piece, testing if Gideon would crack. Saturday morning, his sister Rhiannon showed up unannounced, as she often did. She pushed past him with a paper bag of groceries, muttering about how he probably hadn't fed himself properly since Cambria left. "I'm fine," Gideon said, following her into the kitchen. On Sunday, he went for a long walk around Laurelhurst Park. Families were out with strollers, joggers circled the paths, dogs pulled at their leashes. Gideon sat on a bench and watched life move on, steady and indifferent. For years, Cambria had been the centerpiece of his personal world. And yet, the world itself didn't blink at her absence. His phone buzzed. A text from his cousin Maren in Seattle. "Heard about Cambria. If you ever need a weekend away, you've got a couch here." Another buzz, this time from an old college friend, Ezra. "Saw Cambria on Instagram. Man, sorry, you're better off. Let's catch up soon." It was strange how fast news traveled. Stranger still, how much support poured in once people knew. Gideon hadn't realized how many connections he still had, how many people actually cared about his well-being. That night, he sat at his desk with a legal pad. He wrote down 2 columns, what I lost and what I gained. Under lost, he wrote, Cambria's companionship, shared future plans, some furniture and decor I didn't care about. Under gained, he wrote, clarity, peace at home, respect for myself, freedom. The second list was longer. That surprised him. As the week began, Gideon noticed subtle shifts in himself. He walked taller. He answered questions at work with more confidence. He laughed more easily with coworkers. It wasn't that he didn't feel the sting of Cambria's absence. It was that he had stopped treating it as a wound. It was just a fact. She was gone. Life went on. And quietly, in the back of his mind, Gideon knew something else. Cambria had expected him to break down, to beg, to make her absence feel powerful. But instead, he was moving forward. And that, more than anything, would haunt her. By midweek, whispers had started to find their way to Gideon like smoke slipping under a closed door. He hadn't asked, hadn't searched, hadn't even brought Cambria up in conversation, but people couldn't resist sharing what they'd seen. It began with Callum, who leaned across the bar table one night and lowered his voice like they were plotting a crime. "Don't shoot the messenger," Callum said, "but Cambria was at Eastbourne last night. With some guy." Gideon kept his face blank. "Okay, like, really with him? Sitting close, laughing, touching his arm, the whole thing. You good?" "I'm fine." And he was, strangely enough. The image didn't stab him. It barely even surprised him. This was the woman who claimed she needed space to figure herself out. Of course she wasn't meditating in the mountains or journaling under candlelight. She was at a bar, chasing attention. 2 days later, his neighbor Mrs. Aldridge stopped him on the sidewalk. Saw Cambria's car gone for good, huh? Well, I don't mean to pry, but my niece said she spotted her downtown, dancing like she was 21 again. Gideon gave her a polite smile. Thanks for letting me know. And he meant it. People could believe whatever version of the story Cambria wanted to sell. The truth didn't need defending. It stood on its own. Still, curiosity got the better of him one night when he opened Instagram for the first time since the split. He didn't follow Cambria anymore, but mutual friends did, and the algorithm had no mercy. There she was, smiling in a new dress, cocktail in hand, tagged at rooftop bars, captioned with quotes about rebirth and living authentically. The comments were a mix of praise and skepticism. Yes, Queen, you look amazing. But also, wait, what happened with Gideon? He scrolled for 5 minutes before closing the app. That was enough. He didn't need digital evidence to confirm what he already knew. Cambria wasn't finding herself. She was chasing validation from strangers with craft cocktails and neon lights. That weekend, Ezra, the old college friend who'd texted earlier, called him. Man, I hate to say this, but Cambria's telling people she left because you were controlling. Said you didn't let her breathe. Gideon rubbed his temple. Controlling me? I know it's crap, Ezra said quickly. Everyone who knows you knows it's crap. But that's the version she's putting out there. For a moment, Gideon let the frustration rise. The nerve of her, walking out, then rewriting history to make herself the hero. But then the irritation faded into something calmer. He couldn't control her words any more than he could control the weather. People who mattered knew the truth. People who didn't, well, their opinions didn't pay his bills or warm his bed. Thanks for telling me, Gideon said. But I'm not engaging. Good, Ezra replied. That's the power move. On Sunday, Gideon went grocery shopping. In the frozen aisle, he ran into an old acquaintance, Tessa, who raised her eyebrows at him. Hey stranger, I heard about you and Cambria. How you holding up? I'm all right, he said. She's been out a lot. Like, really out. Every time I check stories, she's in a different bar. You're not missing much, trust me. Gideon smiled faintly. Thanks, Tessa. He walked away realizing something important. While everyone else was watching Cambria unravel, he was living his life quietly, steadily. And that contrast would speak louder than anything he could ever say. That night, as he cooked dinner, grilled chicken and vegetables, nothing fancy, he thought about how silence could be its own kind of strength. Cambria's voice was everywhere, loud and insistent, demanding attention. His voice was nowhere, and yet, in his stillness, he was winning. He plated his meal, sat at the dining table, and ate slowly. The rumors no longer bothered him. They were background noise, the static of someone else's chaos. For the first time since the breakup, Gideon felt a flicker of pride. He wasn't bitter, he wasn't chasing, he wasn't defending himself against lies. He was simply living, and that was enough. A mutual friend had shared one of her posts in the chat with a laughing emoji. Gideon clicked out of habit before he could stop himself. The image filled the screen, Cambria on a rooftop bar downtown, wearing a sequined dress that looked nothing like her old style. She had a cocktail in one hand and the city skyline behind her. The caption read, "Sometimes you have to lose yourself to find yourself. Here's to freedom, sparkles, clinking glasses, #new beginnings, #unapologetic." The comments rolled in fast. Yes, Cambria, love this energy. Who's the mystery man? Eyes, girl, you're glowing. Gideon locked his phone. For a moment, an old ache tugged at him. The ache of recognizing the woman he once loved, now playing dress up as someone he didn't know. But the ache didn't last. Instead, a strange kind of clarity set in. This wasn't growth. It was theater. Cambria was performing freedom like it was a role in a play. Every outfit, every caption, every pose was designed not for self-discovery but for an audience. She wasn't living authentically. She was marketing herself to strangers for approval. The next morning, while sipping his coffee, Gideon scrolled again. More posts, brunch selfies, dance floor clips, blurry photos with people he didn't recognize. The hashtags multiplied, #rebirth, #living my truth, #no fear. He noticed something else, too. Her smile looked different, stretched, almost rehearsed, like she had to prove she was happy instead of simply being happy. Later that week, during lunch at the office, Shay leaned over. Hey, I saw Cambria's story. She's on some guy's boat. Did she always know those types of people? Gideon shrugged. Not that I knew of. Shay tilted her head. You're not bothered? No, and it was true. Once upon a time, he might have been jealous, wondering who the man was, what Cambria saw in him. But now, Gideon just saw patterns. Cambria wasn't finding new friends. She was orbiting anyone who offered her the right kind of spotlight. That weekend, Rhiannon came over again, this time armed with a bottle of wine. They sat on the porch as twilight settled over the neighborhood. Cicadas hummed in the distance. "You've seen her posts, right?" Rhiannon asked, pouring them each a glass. "Unfortunately, she's trying so hard," Rhiannon said, shaking her head. "It's embarrassing, honestly. Everyone can tell she's just putting on a show." Gideon sipped his wine. "Let her, that's her choice. You don't even feel tempted to, I don't know, message her, remind her what she gave up?" He smiled faintly. "Why would I remind someone of their mistake when they're already living with it every day?" Rhiannon studied him. "You're handling this better than anyone expected." "Better than I expected, too," Gideon admitted. That night, he stayed up late, sitting at his desk again with the legal pad. This time, he wrote a single sentence across the top: "Happiness is quiet." He thought about it carefully. Cambria's happiness had become loud, public, fragile. His own was private, steady, building itself quietly inside his routines: morning runs, dinners cooked for one, the satisfaction of closing a big project at work. Scrolling through her feed had given him an unexpected gift: perspective. He no longer saw her as the woman who left him. He saw her as someone lost, trying to fill the silence with noise. The next day, he deleted Instagram from his phone, not out of anger, but out of choice. He didn't need to keep peeking into a life that wasn't his. He had his own to live. In the weeks that followed, his life began to shift in subtle ways. He started waking up earlier, running longer distances. He picked up old hobbies: photography, woodworking, things he'd set aside when Cambria demanded all his time. His evenings filled with music instead of scrolling, with books instead of rumors. He set down the sandpaper, brushed sawdust from his hands, and smiled to himself. Cambria could keep performing her version of freedom. Gideon was living the real thing. It happened on a Tuesday night, 3 weeks after Cambria had walked out. Gideon had just finished a late workout and was standing in the kitchen, drinking water straight from the glass pitcher, when his phone buzzed. A message from her. "Cambria, hey, how are you?" He hit send and set the phone down. It buzzed almost immediately. "Cambria, that's not fair. People make mistakes. People get scared." "Gideon, scared is fine. Lying to yourself isn't. You wanted to leave, so you left. Own it." There was no reply after that. 2 days passed. Gideon assumed the conversation was over, until Friday evening, when his phone rang. Her name lit up the screen. For a moment, he considered answering. Then he let it ring out. A voicemail appeared. He didn't listen to it. Instead, he opened his journal again. "She's realizing the difference between attention and commitment, between noise and stability. But that realization is hers to sit with, not mine to fix." That weekend, while he was sanding down the oak table in his garage, Rhiannon stopped by. She leaned in the doorway, arms crossed. "She texted you, didn't she?" Gideon raised an eyebrow. "News travels fast." "She texted me, too," Rhiannon said, rolling her eyes. "Wanted me to put in a good word. Like this is high school." "Nope. She thinks you're just being stubborn, that deep down you still want her back." Gideon shook his head. "I don't. I want peace, and I have it." That night, while cooking dinner, he replayed her messages in his mind. Not with longing, but with curiosity. Why now? Why reach out after weeks of silence? The answer came easily. Her performance had worn thin. The parties, the rooftop bars, the borrowed validation, they hadn't filled the void. And so, as predictable as the tide, she returned to the shore she had abandoned, hoping it hadn't eroded without her. But it had, and what replaced it was stronger. Later that evening, his phone buzzed again. "Cambria, I just want to see you. Please, one conversation." This time, Gideon replied with finality. "Gideon, you walked out, Cambria. That door closed behind you. There's nothing left to talk about." He put the phone face down, plated his meal, and sat at the dining table. The silence around him was no longer empty, it was earned. Gideon was in the garage, headphones on, smoothing the edges of the oak table he'd been building. The bass of the music thumped in his ears, steady and grounding. At first, he thought he'd imagined the sound. But then it came again, 3 quick raps against the front door. He pulled the headphones off and wiped the sawdust from his hands. Through the small window near the entryway, he saw a shape that made his chest tighten for half a second. Cambria. She was dressed down, jeans, a soft sweater, hair tied back. No sequins, no rooftop energy, no hashtags. Just Cambria, standing on his porch like nothing had happened. For a moment, Gideon considered not answering. But avoiding her wasn't the same as facing her. And he was done avoiding. He opened the door. Her eyes lit up. "Hi, Cambria." His tone was neutral, polite as if she were a delivery driver holding a package. "Can I come in? You wanted freedom." "I know," she said quickly. "I thought I did, but freedom isn't what I imagined." She faltered. "It's lonely." He let her words hang in the air. "Gideon," she said finally, "I made a mistake." "I know you're angry." "I'm not angry," he interrupted. Her brows knit. "Then what are you?" "Clear," he said. "Clear about what I want, and clear about what I don't." She leaned forward. "You don't miss me, not even a little." He thought about it honestly. The nights he'd lain awake replaying her leaving. The flashes of anger when the rumors reached him. The pang of seeing her online, pretending to glow. Those were real, but they weren't the same as missing her. "No," he said. "I miss who I thought you were, not who you showed me you are." Cambria blinked, as if he'd slapped her. She tried again, softer this time. "We had good times, though. Don't you remember that trip to Asheville, the night we stayed up till sunrise on the porch?" Gideon nodded. "I remember, but I also remember you telling me I was too serious for wanting something real. I remember you leaving without warning, and I remember you rewriting the story so I looked like the villain. So yes, I remember." Her lips parted, but no words came. Finally, she whispered, "I was scared." "You still are," Gideon said. "But fear isn't a reason to break someone else's life apart. That was your choice, and choices have consequences." The room went still. Outside, a lawnmower droned faintly down the street. She looked at him, eyes glossy. "So that's it, you won't even consider giving us another chance?" Gideon stood there for a long moment, listening to the sound of her car pulling away. Then he returned to the garage, slipped his headphones back on, and pressed the sandpaper to the oak once more. The rhythm steadied him, grounding him in something real, something he could shape with his own hands. As the dust curled into the air, he felt lighter. The temptation had come and gone, and he hadn't wavered. For the first time since Cambria left, Gideon realized he wasn't just surviving the breakup. He was winning it. 2 weeks after showing up at Gideon's door, Cambria's online feed looked louder than ever. More rooftop parties, more glittery selfies, more captions about living without fear. But behind the filters, cracks were showing. At first, only small ones. A comment here, a friend pulling away there. "Did you notice?" one of her acquaintances whispered at a brunch. Cambria forced a smile. "Just tired." The truth was uglier. She wasn't tired. She was empty. But when she looked around that night, she realized most of the people didn't know her. Not really. They knew the Cambria she performed online. The real one, afraid, restless, regretting, was nowhere in the room. And when the last guest left, she sat in the silence, staring at the half-eaten chips and lipstick-stained glasses, fighting back tears. Her spiral deepened in small humiliations. A friend she'd leaned on stopped answering her calls. Another unfollowed her entirely. The man with the boat, gone, moved on to someone younger, more dazzling. Cambria doubled down on posting, convinced she could outrun the emptiness with noise. But the likes slowed, the comments thinned. The spotlight she'd chased so desperately was already fading. Meanwhile, Gideon's spotlight was just beginning. One evening, he got a call from his sister in Vermont. "Hey, Mom says you seem different lately. Happier. What's going on?" He laughed. "Nothing dramatic. Just cutting out the noise." She smiled through the phone. "Whatever it is, it looks good on you." Later, after hanging up, Gideon sat at the finished oak table, tracing his fingers along the smooth surface. This table, he realized, was symbolic. It was solid, built to last, something he could sit at for years without it breaking beneath him. It was everything his relationship with Cambria hadn't been. That night, Cambria sat in her car outside the same house she had once stormed out of. She hadn't planned on driving there, but after another empty evening, her hands had taken the wheel before her mind could stop them. She stared at the lit window. She imagined him inside, maybe reading, maybe cooking. She wondered if he thought of her at all. Tears stung her eyes. She didn't knock this time. She just sat there until the streetlights buzzed overhead and the silence grew too heavy. When she finally drove away, the ache in her chest was no longer about losing Gideon. It was about losing herself. The night of Rhiannon's birthday party, Gideon almost didn't go. He'd been working all week, and the thought of a quiet evening with a book sounded appealing. But Rhiannon had insisted. "Come on," she said over the phone. "It's at Marlowe's downtown. Everyone's coming. You need to show your face." So he put on a crisp navy button-down, dark jeans, and headed out. Nothing flashy, nothing forced. Just clean and confident. She hadn't seen him yet. She was laughing loudly, too loudly, her hand resting on the arm of a man she'd met only recently. Her dress shimmered under the dim lights, but her eyes carried a tiredness that the glitter couldn't mask. When she finally looked up and saw him, the laughter faltered. The room seemed to bend in on itself for a moment. A year ago, they would have arrived together, her hand in his, their presence seamless. Tonight, they stood on opposite ends of the room, orbiting entirely different worlds. Gideon didn't flinch. He smiled at someone in Rhiannon's circle, started a light conversation, and let his ease carry through. Cambria, meanwhile, adjusted her hair, smoothed her dress, and tried to pull her companion closer, as if to prove something. But people noticed. One of Rhiannon's friends whispered, "Is that his ex?" Rhiannon nodded subtly. "Yep, watch this." As the evening went on, the contrast became sharper. Gideon was calm, collected, laughing with friends, asking thoughtful questions, genuinely present. Cambria, on the other hand, seemed restless. She checked her phone often, her laughter pitched higher, her glass never empty. At one point, she drifted closer to the group where Gideon was. "Stan ND, Cambria," he replied with a polite nod. "You look good," she said, eyes scanning him. "Thank you." He sipped his drink, unbothered. There was a pause, the kind that in the past would have been filled with private jokes or whispered plans. Now it just hung there, heavy and exposed. She tilted her head. "I didn't expect to see you here. This is Rhiannon's night," he said simply. "Wouldn't miss it." Something flickered in her expression. She wanted more, an opening, a hint of warmth, some evidence that he still carried her in his orbit. But Gideon gave her nothing beyond civility. When she finally drifted back toward the bar, one of Rhiannon's friends leaned in. "Man, you handled that like a pro." Gideon shrugged. "There's nothing to handle." But the truth was, there was something to notice. Everyone at the party had seen the difference. Cambria looked like someone burning out in real time, clinging to the edges of attention. Gideon looked like someone grounded, steady, magnetic without even trying. For the first time, she wasn't the center. He was, not because he chased it, but because he didn't need it. But for Cambria, the ghosts had taken over. Her spiral didn't stop after Marlowe's. If anything, it deepened. Invitations slowed, then dried up. The friend group that once orbited her had shifted to fresher faces. The men who once bought her drinks and whispered promises found other distractions. One evening, she sat in her apartment scrolling through old photos of herself and Gideon, vacations, late-night porch talks, the silly selfies they'd taken in the grocery store. The pictures glowed with something she couldn't recreate anymore. The more she looked, the heavier the silence became. Her phone buzzed, a notification from social media. Gideon had been tagged in a photo. She tapped it before she could stop herself. It was him, standing by his oak table, smiling with friends around him. The caption read, "Built by hand, shared with love. Here's to many more nights like this." Cambria stared at it, her throat tightening. It wasn't just the table, though that alone was a symbol she couldn't ignore. It was the light in his face. He looked free, not flashy, not loud, just steady, whole, and surrounded. She threw her phone on the couch, but the image stayed in her mind. The next morning, she woke up late, groggy, the taste of last night's wine still on her tongue. For the first time, she didn't reach for her phone. She didn't post. She just sat there, staring at the wall, realizing the truth she'd been running from. She had lost him, not just Gideon the man, but the Gideon inside herself, the groundedness, the calm, the anchor. She had traded it for noise, and the noise had abandoned her. Meanwhile, Gideon's world continued forward. At work, he accepted the leadership role his manager had hinted at. At home, he finished another project, this time a bookshelf, which he lined with novels he'd been meaning to read for years. His garage no longer smelled of sawdust alone, but of progress, steady and lived in. One evening, Rhiannon asked him, "Do you ever regret how it all ended?" He thought about it, really thought, then shook his head. "No, it had to happen. Otherwise I'd still be chasing someone who didn't want to be caught. I'd still be building my life on sand instead of stone." She smiled. "You're stronger now." "Not stronger," he corrected. "Just clearer." That weekend, Gideon hosted another dinner. Friends filled the house with warmth, laughter bouncing off the walls. Someone raised a glass to him, to Gideon, for reminding us what it looks like to build something real. The toast landed deeper than they knew. Far across town, Cambria sat in her darkened apartment, scrolling through endless feeds, her reflection staring back at her from the black screen between swipes. The parties were quieter now, the invitations fewer, her image slipping faster than she could grasp. For the first time, she understood what Gideon had meant at the door that day. "I don't fight for people who choose to walk away." And he hadn't, because he didn't need to. Cambria's freedom had led her to emptiness. Gideon's loss had led him to clarity. That was the final difference. And it was permanent.